Mara's teeth sank deep into flesh as grimy fingers clawed at her swollen belly. Blood filled her mouth, his blood not hers for once. And the drunk's scream pierced the desert air like a war cry. The crowd surrounding the auction block roared its approval, a pack of wolves scenting violence. "Bite the merchandise, will you?" Marjorie's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. Her stepmother's hand cracked across Mara's face with the force of 18 years of accumulated hatred, sending stars exploding across her vision. At 18, 6 months pregnant and chained like livestock in Windy Ridge's sun-baked town square, Mara spat crimson into the dust. The sky above burned red as dried blood, and the crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with a peculiar hunger that came from watching someone else's suffering. $25 for this hellcat. Marjorie shrieked, her eyes gleaming with avarice. "She's carrying another man's bastard, but she's got spirit who'll take her." Another drunk lurched forward, coins jingling in his trembling hands. "Let me see what I'm buying first," he slurred, reaching for Mara's torn dress. She struck like a cornered rattlesnake, her elbow connecting with his nose in a spray of blood and cartilage. He stumbled backward, cursing, as laughter erupted from the crowd. Someone threw a stone that grazed her shoulder. Another spat tobacco juice at her feet. $30, came a quiet voice from the crowd's edge. The laughter died as Cole Garrett pushed through the wall of bodies. His weathered face could have been carved from desert stone, and the network of scars running along his left cheek told stories of violence survived. His eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from burying too many dreams in frontier soil. $30. He repeated his voice, carrying the weight of a man who'd learned that words were currency best spent sparingly. Marjorie's face lit up with greed. Sold to the scarred widower, Cole counted out the money with deliberate precision, bills earned through months of breaking horses and mending fences in the unforgiving sun. As he unlocked Mara's shackles, she looked up at him with eyes that held more wariness than gratitude. "You work for your keep," he said, his voice rougher than the country they'd ride through. Nothing more expected. The iron fell away from her wrists with metallic finality. Mara rubbed the raw flesh, studying this man who'd bought her freedom, or perhaps just another form of slavery. She'd learned not to trust kindness, especially from men who paid for women. The wagon ride to Cole's ranch passed in silence, broken only by the grinding of wheels against stone and the distant cry of something wild and hungry. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of red earth and thorny scrub, painted against a sky that seemed to mock them with its vastness. Cole's ranch house rose from the wasteland like a monument to stubborn survival. Weathered wood and broken dreams held together by desperate pride and the kind of determination that refused to acknowledge defeat. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and most of the fence posts needed replacing, but everything stood solid against the wind. "Rooms in back," Cole said, helping her down from the wagon with hands that were surprisingly gentle. "Keep to yourself, and we'll get along fine." A small figure darted behind the barn, a boy of perhaps 8, with Cole's dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. When Mara tried to catch his gaze, he vanished like smoke on the wind. "Ethan Ho," Cole called to the empty air. Boy don't talk much. Lost his voice when his mother died. Fever took her 2 winters back. Mara nodded, understanding the weight of grief that could steal words from a child's throat. She'd carried her own silence long enough to recognize it in others. The boy's pain was written in every line of his small body, in the way he held himself apart from the world. The days that followed fell into punishing rhythm. Despite her condition, Mara worked from dawn to dusk, hauling water from the well, tending the struggling garden, mending clothes worn thin by desert wind and frontier hardship. The physical labor was brutal, but it was honest work, and she found unexpected satisfaction in earning her place through sweat and determination. Cole remained distant, speaking only when necessary. But she caught him watching her sometimes, not with a hunger she'd learned to fear from men, but with something like puzzled recognition. He seemed to be trying to solve some internal mystery, as if her presence had disrupted calculations he'd been making for years. Ethan was a ghost in his own home, appearing for meals and disappearing at the first word spoken in his direction. But Mara noticed how he lingered when she hummed while working, how he crept closer when she told stories to the evening stars, thinking no one would notice. She began leaving extra biscuits where he'd find them, along with small carved figures that Cole made during his evening hours, gentle offerings to a wounded spirit. The boy's silence was different from her own. Where her muteness had been born of shame and fear, his seemed to come from a deeper place, a fundamental break in his connection to the world. Sometimes she caught him watching her, with ancient eyes, as if he understood things about loss and survival that most adults never learned. The trouble came riding hard 3 weeks after her arrival. Sheriff Thorne's dust cloud appeared on the horizon like an approaching plague, his badge catching the harsh sunlight like a warning signal. Mara's blood turned to ice water as she recognized the man who'd destroyed her innocence in a jail cell 6 months ago. The monster who'd planted the child now growing in her belly. "Well, well," Thorne said as he dismounted with predatory grace. "Heard you bought yourself some company, Cole. Mighty charitable of you taking in damaged goods." Cole emerged from the barn, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. The two men had known each other for years, but there was no warmth in their acknowledgement, just the careful assessment of potential enemies. Sheriff Cole's voice was steady as bedrock. "What brings you out this way?" "Reports of stolen property." Thorne replied, his pale eyes fixed on Mara like a snake studying prey. "Seems this girl ran off with something valuable. Might need to search your place." Mara's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the blood-stained kerchief lay hidden, the only evidence of Thorne's crime, torn from his shirt during her desperate fight for survival. She'd kept it as proof, though she'd never imagined having the courage to use it against a man with a badge and the power of law behind him. "She's committed no crime." Cole said, his voice carrying quiet steel. Thorne's laughter was sharp as breaking glass, echoing off the barn walls. "No crime. Look at her, Cole. She's carrying proof of her sins for all to see. Give her up or face charges yourself. Harboring a fugitive is serious business in this territory." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. But Cole didn't flinch. His scarred face remained impassive, though Mara could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing odds, considering options, preparing for whatever might come. "You got papers for these charges?" Cole asked. "Don't need papers in Windy Ridge." Thorne's smile revealed teeth like yellowed fangs. "My word is law here, always has been." As Thorne and his deputies rode away in a cloud of dust and implied violence, Cole turned to Mara with new understanding in his eyes. "What kind of trouble are you really carrying?" But Mara had already retreated into the house, her secret burning like a brand against her chest. She couldn't tell him about that horrible night, about the badge that had become a weapon, about the evidence she'd preserved like a prayer for justice that might never come. The weeks that followed tested every ounce of strength Mara possessed. In town, the good citizens of Windy Ridge treated her like a plague carrier, crossing the street to avoid her path and covering their children's eyes when she passed. At church, stones landed at her feet while whispered prayers asked God to cleanse their community of sin. "Devil's whore," someone hissed as she walked past the general store. "Carrying Satan's spawn." Another voice added the words following her like a curse. The children were the cruelest, as children often are when they sense weakness. They threw rocks and called her names their parents had taught them, their young faces twisted with learned hatred. But Mara endured it all, finding purpose in the small kindnesses she could offer in return. She left extra food where Ethan would find it, told stories to the walls that she knew he was listening to from his hiding places, and stood guard during the long nights when drunken men rode up to the ranch demanding Cole hand over his property. You don't have to protect me, Cole said after one particularly violent encounter, watching Mara tend to his split lip with gentle hands. Yes, I do, she replied, her voice firm with conviction. You bought my freedom when no one else would. I'll do whatever it takes to keep it. The truth of her words would be tested sooner than either of them imagined. Marjorie, it seemed, had grown hungry for more than the $30 Cole had paid. Mara overheard her stepmother confronting Thorne behind the general store, her voice shrill with desperate greed. I know what you did to her, Marjorie hissed like an angry snake. I know why she ran to your jail that night, and I know what happened after. Pay me to keep quiet, or I'll tell the whole town about your midnight visits. Thorne's response was swift and brutal. Mara watched from the shadows as he struck Marjorie down with casual violence, his voice deadly quiet. Try to blackmail me again, and you'll disappear like the others. There's plenty of desert out there for burying mistakes. The confrontation that followed would change everything. Cole, who had spent months avoiding conflict, finally took a stand when Thorne cornered Mara in the town square, accusing her of seducing decent men with her wicked ways. That's enough, Cole said, his voice carrying across the square like a gunshot. This girl has done nothing but work hard and mind her own business. If you got accusations, make them proper-like with evidence and witnesses. The crowd murmured, surprised by Cole's public defense. But Thorne's smile was sharp as a blade, and his eyes held the cold fire of a man who'd been challenged in front of his subjects. Evidence. Thorne laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Look at her belly, Cole. What more evidence do you need? What decent woman ends up in her condition without being exactly what she appears to be? Maybe the kind of woman who was hurt by someone with enough power to silence her. Cole replied, his words carefully chosen but clear in their meaning. The implications hung in the air like a challenge, and Thorne's mask of civility finally slipped. Careful, Cowboy. Accusations like that could get a man killed. Or worse, they could get the people he cares about hurt. But the damage was done. Whispers began to spread through Windy Ridge, not about Mara's shame, but about the sheriff's violent reaction to Cole's words. People began to remember other girls who'd disappeared, other families who'd been broken by unexplained tragedies. Dr. Morrison ran the only medical practice for 50 miles, a gentle man whose kind eyes had seen too much suffering to judge anyone harshly. When Mara collapsed while hanging laundry, her body finally succumbing to months of stress and malnutrition, Cole carried her to the doctor's small office above the general store. Easy, child, Morrison murmured as he examined her with practiced hands. His touch was professional and gentle, but his expression grew increasingly troubled as he worked. Cole, step outside for a moment. I need to speak with you. In the hallway, Morrison's voice was grave. These aren't the injuries of a willing partner. This girl was brutalized, and recently enough that the trauma is still visible. Someone did terrible things to her. Cole's jaw tightened like a steel trap. Can you prove it? I can testify to what I've seen, Morrison replied carefully. But Cole, if she was assaulted by someone with authority, someone with power to silence witnesses. The doctor's words trailed off, but his meaning was clear. In a territory where law enforcement was often corrupt and justice was whatever the man with the badge decided it was, evidence meant nothing without the power to present it. It was then that Mara made her choice. Weak from her collapse but strong in her resolve, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the blood-stained kerchief. The fabric was stained brown with old blood, but it was unmistakably evidence of violence. This is from his shirt, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. From the night it happened. Cole stared at the stained fabric, understanding, flooding his scarred features like sunrise after a long night. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was terrified. Tears streamed down her face, washing clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Terrified you'd think I was lying like everyone else. Terrified he'd hurt you and Ethan if I spoke up. Terrified that even with proof, no one would believe a pregnant girl over a man with a badge. Morrison handled the kerchief with reverent care, his medical training allowing him to recognize the significance of what he was seeing. This could be enough to bring charges, child. But only if you're willing to testify, to stand up in court and tell your story. I am. Mara said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I won't let him hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. But Thorn wasn't finished with them. News of Mara's evidence spread through the town like wildfire carried by loose tongues and eager gossips. The sheriff's response was swift and vicious, striking where Cole was most vulnerable through his silent, traumatized son. The deputy who brought the message was young and clearly uncomfortable with his task. He arrived at sunset, hat in hand, and fear in his eyes, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Sheriff's got your boy Cole, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Took him from near the old church while he was playing. Says to bring the girl and her evidence, or the boy burns with the building. Mara felt her world crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. The thought of Ethan, gentle wounded Ethan, suffering because of her secrets was unbearable. The boy who'd finally begun to trust her, who'd started leaving her small gifts and listening to her stories, was now in danger because she dared to speak the truth. We give him what he wants, she said, her voice breaking with anguish. No. Cole's reply was iron-hard, forged in the fires of determination. We find another way. I won't sacrifice you to save him, and I won't teach him that evil wins when good people surrender. That night, as desert wind howled across the wasteland, like the voices of the damned, Mara told Cole everything. About the assault that had planted the child in her womb, about her desperate attempt to end her own life afterward, about the fear that had consumed every waking moment since that terrible night. I couldn't live with the shame, she whispered, her words torn from the deepest part of her soul. I thought of escaping the burden of carrying his child. But I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't condemn an innocent baby for the sins of its father. Now Ethan's going to pay for my cowardice. Cole listened without judgment, his calloused hands gentle on her shoulders. When she finished, he pulled her close, and she could feel the steady beating of his heart against her cheek. Your child deserves better than what Thorn would give him, he said quietly. And Ethan needs us both. We'll get him back, and we'll make sure Thorn pays for what he's done. The plan they hatched was born of desperation and love, in equal measure. Using the cover of a brewing sandstorm, they would approach the old church from behind, hoping to free Ethan before Thorn could carry out his threat. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. The old church crouched against the star-drunk sky like a wounded beast, its walls crumbling under the weight of too many abandoned prayers. They approached through swirling sand that bit at their faces like angry wasps, the wind howling prophecies of doom across the empty landscape. Through broken windows, they could see the flicker of lantern light against rotting beams. Thorn waited inside with the patience of a predator, his trap set and his prey approaching. Kerosene pooled around his feet like liquid death, and the acrid smell of fuel mixed with the scent of decay. Ethan sat bound in the front pew, his young face pale but determined. Even in his terror, the boy showed the same stubborn courage that had carried his father through years of frontier hardship. His eyes met Mara's through the window, and she saw not accusation, but understanding. He knew she'd come for him. "Bring me the kerchief," Thorn called as they entered through the side door, his voice echoing off the rotting walls. "Time to finish what we started in that jail cell, girl. You and your bastard child are going to burn with this place." "Let the boy go first." Cole demanded, his gun drawn, but held low. "Your quarrel is with us, not him. I don't think you understand your position here, Scarface." Thorn's smile was all teeth and malice. "You're not giving orders. You're begging for mercy you won't receive. The sheriff waved his lantern dangerously close to the kerosene-soaked floor, and the flame dancing like a captured demon. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and the entire structure would become an inferno in seconds. But as they faced off in the dying church, footsteps echoed from the shadows behind the altar. Dr. Morrison stepped into the light, his own weapon trained on Cole's back. Mara's heart stopped as she realized the horrible truth that the kind doctor who'd helped her, who promised to testify on her behalf, was Thorne's creature. "Doctor," she gasped, the word torn from her throat like a physical wound. Morrison's face was etched with shame but not surprise. "I'm sorry, child. So very sorry. But Thorne, he has ways of ensuring cooperation. My gambling debts, certain indiscretions with female patients, my wife's laudanum addiction. He owns me body and soul." The betrayal hit like a physical blow, doubling her over with pain that went deeper than any physical wound. The man who'd examined her injuries with gentle hands, who'd spoken of justice and truth, had been reporting every confidence to her tormentor. Every plan shared every hope, expressed every moment of vulnerability, all of it fed back to the monster who destroyed her innocence. And that you delivered other girls to him. Mara realized with growing horror. You were his procurer, his accomplice in every crime. I provided medical services when needed. Morrison said defensively, but his voice shook with the weight of 30 years of complicity. I never participated directly in what he did to them. That you enabled a monster. Cole spat, his voice thick with disgust. You cleaned up his messes and kept his secrets while innocent girls suffered. I had no choice. Morrison's composure cracked, revealing the tortured soul beneath. He would have destroyed my practice, my marriage, my life. I did what I had to do to survive. The confrontation exploded into violence. When Thorne moved toward Ethan with the lantern, his eyes blazing with the madness of a cornered animal, Cole struck without hesitation, his body slamming into the sheriff's, as Morrison's gun wavered uncertainly between them. The lantern flew from Thorne's grasp, spinning through the air in a graceful arc, before shattering against the dry wood of the altar. Flames erupted instantly, feeding on the kerosene-soaked timber with terrifying hunger. The fire spread with unnatural speed, climbing the walls like hungry demons awakened from slumber. But Morrison's betrayal contained the seeds of redemption. As flames consumed the rotting structure and Ethan's terrified cries filled the smoke-choked air, 30 years of complicity warred with whatever conscience remained in the doctor's corrupted soul. This wasn't supposed to happen. He muttered, lowering his weapon as fire spread around them like a living thing. No one was supposed to die. It was just supposed to be silence, just covering up the evidence. Then help us, Mara pleaded, pulling frantically at Ethan's bonds as smoke burned her lungs and tears streamed down her face. Help us save him. The front door was blocked by fallen beams debris that had collapsed when the fire weakened the structure. The windows were too narrow for escape, and the flames were spreading faster than they could retreat. Heat grew unbearable, and the smoke was so thick that breathing became a struggle. Morrison stared at the growing inferno, his weapon forgotten in his hand. 30 years of covering for a monster, 30 years of silence bought with threats and blackmail. 30 years of watching innocents suffer while he preserved his own comfortable existence. I can't, he whispered, but his voice was breaking. 30 years of this. I can't undo it all in one moment. But Thorne settled the matter by lunging for Morrison's gun, his clothes beginning to smolder from the heat. Kill them all. He snarled, his voice barely human now. Burn them all, we'll say they started the fire. In the desperate struggle that followed, the weapon discharged. The bullet took Thorne in the shoulder, spinning him into the blazing altar, where flames immediately began consuming his clothes. His scream of rage echoed through the burning church, but he grabbed a piece of flaming wood and turned toward his enemies with murder in his eyes. "If I burn," he roared, "you all burn with me." Cole broke free from the wreckage of their struggle, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where burning timber had struck him. Using another piece of flaming wood as a lever, he smashed through the debris blocking the side door. Smoke poured out like escaping souls as he pulled Ethan and Mara toward salvation. But in her final moment in that hellish place, as flames roared around them, and death seemed certain, Mara made a choice that would echo through eternity. She pulled out the blood-stained kerchief and held it high above her head, shouting through a broken window to the crowd that had gathered outside. Thorn did this. Her voice carried over the roar of flames and wind clear as a bell despite the smoke and chaos. "He assaulted me in his jail cell. He's hurt other girls too. Ask Dr. Morrison. I'm not ashamed anymore." The crowd pressed closer, their faces illuminated by the growing fire. Some had come to watch the spectacle, others drawn by genuine concern for those trapped inside. But all heard Mara's testimony, her words carrying the ring of truth that no amount of authority could silence. Morrison stumbled after them through the smoke, his clothes singed and his face twisted with anguish. As they collapsed in the dirt outside the burning church, he looked at the gathering crowd and made his own choice for redemption. "She's telling the truth." He gasped, his voice carrying across the assembled townspeople. "God help me, she's telling the truth. I've been covering for him for 30 years, cleaning up his messes, silencing his victims. He's a monster, and I helped him become one." Behind them, Thorn's screams echoed from within the inferno, his voice carrying confessions of guilt and pleas for mercy that would never come. The crowd heard every word, testimonies to crimes they'd refused to see, admissions of corruption that had rotted their community from within like a cancer. "Please." Thorn's voice cracked with desperation as flames consumed him. "I never meant for it to go this far. The girls, they were just supposed to be quiet. I never meant to kill anyone." But the fire showed no mercy, and justice came in the form of purifying flame. The church collapsed inward on itself, taking with it the man who had corrupted everything he touched. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their sheriff met his end, his final confessions burning themselves into their memories. The circuit judge arrived a week later, drawn by reports of the fire and the scandal it had unleashed. Judge Harrison was a fair man, weathered by years of frontier justice, but still capable of recognizing truth when he heard it. He listened to testimony with the patience of someone who understood that real justice required time and careful consideration. Morrison, facing life in prison for his complicity, provided detailed testimony about years of covering up Thorn's crimes. The kerchief Mara had preserved became the cornerstone of evidence against a network of corruption that had infected Windy Ridge for decades. 30 years. Morrison wept before the judge, his voice breaking with the weight of accumulated guilt. 30 years of silence while he destroyed innocence. I thought I was protecting my family, my practice, my reputation. But I was just enabling a monster to grow stronger. The doctor's testimony revealed the full scope of Thorn's predations. At least 8 young women over the years, all silenced by fear, money threats, or death. Some had been driven to suicide by the shame and trauma. Others had simply disappeared, their bodies buried in the vast desert where no one would ever find them. Marjorie, confronted with the collapse of her blackmail scheme and faced with her own complicity in the trafficking that had brought Mara to auction, cracked completely under questioning. Her testimony revealed how she'd sold other girls to Thorn over the years, always telling herself it was just business. "I just wanted enough money to leave this godforsaken place." She sobbed before the judge, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like a house of cards. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt worse than they already were. I thought if they were going to be hurt anyway, at least I could profit from it. But people did get hurt worse because of your greed." Judge Harrison replied sternly, Your actions enabled a predator to flourish. 10 years in territorial prison, and you'll be lucky if that's all you serve. The real transformation began in the days that followed the trial. The minister who had witnessed Mara's courage in the burning church spoke from his pulpit about redemption through truth, about the power of one person's courage to expose systemic corruption. His sermons drew people from across the territory, eager to hear about the girl who had faced down evil with nothing but her voice and her truth. The townspeople, shaken by revelations of their sheriff's crimes and their own complicity in allowing such evil to flourish, began to see Mara not as the fallen woman they'd scorned, but as the brave soul who'd risked everything to expose the corruption that had poisoned their community. But the greatest healing happened quietly in the ranch house, where a broken family learned to trust and love again. Ethan spoke his first words in 2 years while they sat around the kitchen table 3 days after the fire, sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The trauma of his captivity had somehow broken through the barriers that grief had built in his mind. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking directly at Mara with eyes that held newfound clarity. "For saving me. For not letting him hurt me like he hurt you." The words opened floodgates that had been dammed for far too long. Ethan told them about the nightmares that had stolen his voice, about the guilt he'd carried over his mother's death, about the terror that everyone he loved would eventually disappear and leave him alone in the world. "I thought if I didn't talk, if I didn't get close to anyone, they couldn't leave me," he whispered, his voice still rough from disuse. "But when I saw you risk everything to save me, I understood that love is worth the risk of loss." Mara reached across the table and took his small hand in hers, marveling at the trust she saw in his eyes. "Sometimes people leave us, but not by choice. Your mother fought to stay with you as long as she could, and we're not going anywhere. This is our family now." Cole nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Family isn't about blood or the circumstances that bring people together. It's about choosing to stand by each other when the world tries to tear you apart." When Mara went into labor 6 weeks later, both Cole and Ethan were there to welcome their newest family member. The baby emerged, red-faced and furious, his first cries filling the ranch house with the sound of new beginnings and hope reborn. "He's perfect," Cole said, holding the infant with hands that had known violence but chose gentleness. "What will you name him?" Mara looked at the child, who might have been conceived in violence, but was born into love, surrounded by people who would protect and cherish him, regardless of the circumstances of his creation. "Samuel," she said, choosing a name that meant heard by God. "His name is Samuel. Samuel Garrett." Cole corrected quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Because family isn't about who plants the seed, it's about who tends the garden where it grows." Dr. Sarah Chen arrived 3 months later, a Chinese-American physician who'd faced her own battles against prejudice in San Francisco. Her appointment as Windy Ridge's new doctor caused initial controversy among some residents who'd never seen an Asian woman, let alone accepted one as their healer. "I don't care what she looks like or where she comes from," Mara declared at the town meeting where some voiced their concerns. "I care that she heals people and treats them with dignity. Anyone who has a problem with that can take their ignorance somewhere else." Mara's support carried significant weight now. The woman who'd once been scorned as a fallen creature had become a moral authority whose opinion mattered. When she spoke, people listened, and her endorsement could make or break someone's acceptance in the community. Dr. Chen proved herself through skilled care and genuine compassion. When a diphtheria outbreak threatened the town's children the following winter, she worked around the clock teaching families proper sanitation and nursing techniques. Her combination of Western medicine and traditional Chinese remedies proved remarkably effective, and not a single child died under her care. "You stood up for me when no one else would," Dr. Chen told Mara during one of their weekly conversations. In San Francisco, they tolerated me because they needed my skills. Here, you accepted me because it was right. The friendship between the two women became another symbol of Windy Ridge's evolution. Mara learned about Chinese herbs and traditional healing methods, while Dr. Chen gained insight into the particular challenges faced by frontier women. Together, they established support groups for mothers, widows, and wives seeking to escape violent marriages. Running Bear arrived the following spring, a Lakota man whose family had been displaced by expanding white settlements. He came to Windy Ridge seeking only temporary shelter before continuing his journey to join relatives on a distant reservation. But Cole's offer of permanent work changed everything. "You don't have to leave," Cole told him after learning his story. "There's honest work here for any man willing to do it, and respect for anyone who earns it through fair dealing." Some residents grumbled about having a savage in their midst, but Mara's immediate acceptance of Running Bear helped smooth his integration into the community. She understood what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than character, and she wasn't about to let prejudice poison the haven they'd worked so hard to create. Running Bear's decision to stay enriched the community in unexpected ways. His knowledge of native plants and their medicinal properties complemented Dr. Chen's expertise, creating a more comprehensive approach to healing. His understanding of sustainable hunting and fishing practices helped the town better manage its natural resources. Most importantly, his presence challenged remaining prejudices and broadened everyone's perspective on what it meant to be American. Samuel played a crucial role in this cultural integration, his natural curiosity and complete lack of prejudice helping bridge divides that might have seemed insurmountable to adults. He spent hours listening to Running Bear's stories about Lakota traditions and philosophy, then sharing what he learned with other children in ways that fostered understanding rather than fear. Children see truth more clearly than adults. Running Bear observed, watching 3-year-old Samuel help a group of young friends understand the spiritual significance of native hunting traditions. They haven't learned yet to be afraid of differences. The rebuilding of Windy Ridge began symbolically with the church. The townspeople led by Cole and Mara constructed a new house of worship on the ashes of the old. But this church would be different, a sanctuary not just for prayer, but for healing truth and reconciliation. The new building was larger than its predecessor, with windows that let in light and air, and a design that emphasized openness and inclusion rather than the closed, secretive atmosphere of the old structure. Above the altar, they placed a simple wooden cross, hand-carved by Cole during the long winter evenings. Beneath the cross, a small plaque bore words that Mara had chosen after much thought and prayer. "The truth will set you free." On the first anniversary of the fire, Windy Ridge established a new tradition, the Day of Truth, a ceremony where community members could publicly confess mistakes, seek forgiveness, and offer amends for past wrongs. The first celebration was awkward and emotional, but it became a powerful force for healing and reconciliation. "We can't change the past," Mara said in her speech inaugurating the tradition, "but we can choose how we let it shape our future." Truth isn't always comfortable, but it's the only foundation strong enough to build lasting justice upon. The ceremony became annual drawing visitors from across the territory who came to witness this unique approach to community healing. Each year, the ritual grew more powerful as people found the courage to confront their own complicity in the systems that had allowed evil to flourish. Ethan thrived in this atmosphere of openness and accountability. Now 12 years old and blazing with intelligence, freed from trauma's constraints, he threw himself into learning with voracious appetite. His natural eloquence combined with his lived experience of injustice and redemption made him a powerful advocate for reform. He wrote his first letter to the territorial newspaper when he was 13, a passionate plea for better legal protections for women and children. The letter was so well crafted and compelling that it was reprinted in papers across the region, bringing attention to the reforms that Windy Ridge had implemented. "That boy's going to change the world," predicted Judge Harrison during one of his regular visits to the town. "Mark my words, we'll be hearing about Ethan Garrett in the territorial legislature before he's 25. Samuel's development followed a different but equally remarkable path. Where Ethan was serious and studious, focused on justice and law, Samuel possessed an infectious joy and intuitive wisdom that could bridge any divide between people. At 4 years old, he was already mediating disputes between ranch hands and offering insights that amazed adults with their simple profundity. He sees straight to people's hearts. Cole marveled watching Samuel convince 2 feuding cowboys to shake hands over their poker disagreement. Never seen anything like it in a child so young? This gift manifested in increasingly sophisticated ways as Samuel grew. He seemed to possess an innate understanding of human nature that allowed him to find common ground between the most unlikely adversaries. Visiting merchants who arrived angry about delayed payments left smiling after spending an hour with the boy. Feuding neighbors found themselves laughing together after Samuel somehow convinced them to see past their grievances to their shared humanity. The ranch itself had become something of a legend throughout the territory. Travelers spoke of the hospitality they received there, the quality of Cole's livestock, and the wisdom of the woman who had become known as Windy Ridge's unofficial moral compass. But more than that, it had become a symbol of redemption and second chances. Women fleeing abusive situations found not just temporary shelter, but genuine acceptance and support in rebuilding their lives. Men seeking to escape their pasts, gambling debts, drinking problems, violent histories discovered that honest work and fair treatment could restore their self-respect and give them hope for the future. Children who had been abandoned or orphaned learned that families could be chosen as well as born. The ranch house seemed to expand naturally to accommodate whoever needed shelter, and somehow there was always enough food, enough work, enough love to go around. "What you've built here," a visiting minister told Cole and Mara during their 5th year together, "is what every community should aspire to be. A place where people's pasts don't define their futures, where everyone gets a chance to prove their worth." The economic impact of their reputation extended far beyond the ranch itself. Cole's commitment to honest dealing attracted business partners from across the territory. His cattle commanded premium prices because buyers knew they were getting exactly what was advertised: healthy animals, fair weights, no tricks or deceptions. The ranch became a training ground for young cowboys who wanted to learn proper animal husbandry and ethical business practices. Men would travel hundreds of miles to work for Cole Garrett, knowing that his recommendation could open doors throughout the territory. But success brought its own challenges. As Windy Ridge prospered and grew, it attracted attention from less savory elements. Word of the town's transformation had spread, and with it came people who saw opportunity in the community's newfound prosperity and reputation for tolerance. The first serious test came in the form of land speculators who arrived with seemingly legitimate offers to purchase property for development. They spoke of bringing in new businesses, expanding the town's capacity, creating jobs and opportunities for growth. Progress is coming to this territory, whether you like it or not. Their spokesman argued at a packed town meeting. You can either guide that progress and profit from it, or you can be swept aside by it. Some residents were immediately attracted to the promises of easy money and rapid growth. The prospect of selling their land, for many times what they'd paid for it, appealed to those who had struggled for years to make ends meet in the harsh frontier environment. But Cole and others remained skeptical. "If it sounds too good to be true," he warned the assembled crowd, "it probably is. We've built something good here through honest work and mutual support. Let's not throw it away for promises from strangers." The debate divided the community in ways that hadn't been seen since the dark days under Thorne's rule. Families found themselves arguing over dinner tables, neighbors questioning longtime friendships, and the town council struggling to find consensus on how to respond to the offers. Mara found herself at the center of the controversy, sought out by both sides for her opinion. Her support could tip the balance of public opinion, and everyone knew it. The pressure was intense, but she had learned to trust her instincts about people and situations. There's something about them that doesn't sit right. She confided to Cole after meeting privately with the speculators. They say all the right things, but their eyes remind me of Thorne's eyes. Cold and calculating, like they're seeing something we're not. Her suspicions proved prophetic. Ethan, now 16 and possessed of remarkable investigative skills, honed through years of reading law books and court records, began quietly researching the speculators' backgrounds. What he discovered was deeply troubling. They're not legitimate developers. Ethan reported to his parents after weeks of careful investigation. They're front men for a larger operation that buys up land, cheap strips it of anything valuable, then abandons the communities they've destroyed. Armed with this information, Cole and Mara faced a difficult decision. Simply exposing the speculators might drive them away, but it could also make them dangerous. Cornered criminals often lashed out violently, and they had their family and community to protect. The solution came from Samuel, now 8 years old, and blessed with his uncanny ability to read people's true motivations. "They're scared," he observed after watching the speculators address another town meeting. "They talk big and act confident, but they're scared of something. Maybe if we find out what they're afraid of, we can make them go away without anyone getting hurt." Investigation revealed that the speculators were fleeing their own problems, failed schemes in other territories, angry investors, and federal authorities who were beginning to take notice of their fraudulent practices. The knowledge gave the community leverage, but using it required careful planning. Rather than confront the speculators publicly, they arranged for information about the investigation to reach them through seemingly accidental means. A conversation overheard in the general store, a newspaper left, where they would find it casual comments about federal authorities investigating land fraud in neighboring territories. The psychological pressure proved effective. The speculators' confidence began to crack as they realized their past was catching up with them. Their presentations became less polished, their promises more desperate, their behavior increasingly erratic as they sensed the trap closing around them. The end came swiftly. Faced with the choice between fleeing immediately or risking arrest when federal marshals arrived, the speculators chose flight. They left town in the middle of the night, taking with them only what little money they had managed to collect from the most gullible residents. Good riddance was the general sentiment, though some who had supported the development proposals felt embarrassed by their gullibility. The experience served as a valuable lesson about the importance of community solidarity and careful judgment when evaluating opportunities that seemed too good to be true. But the incident also highlighted growing pains within the community. Windy Ridge's success was attracting both opportunities and threats, and not everyone agreed on how to respond to either. Some residents wanted to embrace growth and change more aggressively, while others preferred the slower pace and closer relationships of their smaller community. These philosophical differences came to a head during the annual Founders' Day celebration, an event that had been established to commemorate the town's rebirth after Thorne's downfall. What should have been a joyous occasion instead became a forum for airing grievances and competing visions of the future. "We can't stay small and isolated forever," argued Tom Morrison, the blacksmith, whose business had grown substantially with the town's prosperity. "The world is changing around us. We can either adapt and thrive, or we can stick our heads in the sand and get left behind." Adapt to what countered Mary Patterson, a widow whose late husband had been one of Thorne's victims. "We've built something special here, something worth preserving. Why risk losing it for the promise of more money or more people we don't know?" The debate grew heated with valid points raised on both sides. Some argued for controlled growth that would preserve the community's character while expanding opportunities. Others insisted that any change risked destroying the delicate balance they had achieved. Mara found herself called upon once again to provide guidance. though she was torn between her own conflicting feelings about change and growth. She understood the desire for stability and security, having fought so hard to achieve both. But she also recognized that isolation could become its own kind of prison. "I came here as damaged goods," she told the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the town square, where she had once stood in chains. "Most of you treated me as such, and I don't blame you for that initial reaction. But some people saw past the damage to the person underneath. They gave me a chance to prove my worth, to build something meaningful with my life." She paused, looking around at faces that had become dear to her over the years, faces that had shown her both cruelty and kindness, rejection and acceptance, fear and love. "Now we're being asked to make the same choice about our community," she continued. "Do we see only the risks and challenges that growth might bring? Or do we also see the opportunities to extend our values to more people, to have a greater impact on the world around us?" Her words shifted the tone of the discussion from confrontation to contemplation. Instead of debating whether to change at all, the community began discussing how to change while preserving what mattered most to them. The solution they developed was characteristically thoughtful and inclusive. Windy Ridge would welcome growth, but on its own terms and according to its own values. New businesses would be required to meet community standards for fair treatment of employees and honest dealing with customers. Development would be planned and controlled to preserve the town's character and protect its natural resources. Most importantly, any major changes would require community consensus, built through open discussion and careful consideration. Not just a simple majority vote that could divide neighbors and families. This approach proved its worth when legitimate opportunities did arise. A regional bank impressed by the town's reputation for honest dealing and stable growth offered to establish a branch office in Windy Ridge. After careful consideration and negotiation, the community accepted the proposal, but with conditions that ensured local control and community benefit. The bank's arrival brought increased access to capital for expanding businesses and improved financial services for residents who had previously had to travel great distances for basic banking needs. But more importantly, it validated Windy Ridge's approach to controlled sustainable growth that preserved community values while embracing beneficial change. As the years passed, the ranch continued to serve as both the economic and moral center of the community. Cole's reputation for fairness and integrity made him a natural leader, though he never sought formal political office. His quiet counsel was sought on everything from business disputes to family problems, and his word carried weight throughout the territory. The house itself had expanded organically over time, with new rooms added as needed to accommodate the steady stream of visitors and temporary residents who came seeking help, healing, or simply a place to belong. What had once been a simple ranch house had become something closer to a small hotel, always busy, but never chaotic. Mara managed this complex household with the same practical wisdom she brought to everything else. She could stretch a pot of stew to feed twice the expected number of guests, mediate disputes between strong-willed visitors, and somehow ensure that everyone felt welcome and valued regardless of their circumstances or background. "How do you do it?" Dr. Chen asked her during one particularly busy period when the house was sheltering 3 different families fleeing various forms of trouble. "How do you make it all work so smoothly?" "The same way you heal people," Mara replied with a smile. "You pay attention to what each person needs, you do what you can to provide it, and you trust that love will cover the gaps in your knowledge or resources." It was this philosophy that guided all their efforts, the belief that treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their past mistakes or current circumstances, created the foundation for genuine community and lasting change. The annual Day of Truth ceremonies had evolved into something remarkable, drawing visitors from across the territory and beyond. Each year, the ritual grew more powerful as people found the courage to confront not just their individual mistakes, but the systemic problems that allowed injustice to flourish. Politicians came to observe and learn from Windy Ridge's approach to community healing. Scholars wrote papers about their unique blend of frontier justice and restorative practices. Religious leaders incorporated elements of the ceremony into their own congregations' worship and outreach efforts. But for the residents themselves, the Day of Truth remained simply what it had always been: an opportunity to clear the air, heal old wounds, and renew their commitment to the values that made their community special. On the 10th anniversary of Thorne's death, Mara stood before the largest crowd ever assembled for the ceremony. Representatives from the territorial government were present, along with journalists from major newspapers and visitors from communities across the West who wanted to learn from Windy Ridge's example. 10 years ago, she began her voice carrying clearly across the assembled multitude. I stood in chains in this very square, sold like livestock to the highest bidder. I was broken, ashamed, and certain that my life held no value beyond what men were willing to pay for my body. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some had heard the story before, but many of the visitors were learning these details for the first time. The contrast between the confident, respected woman standing before them and the desperate girl she described was striking. But this community, your community, taught me that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to speak truth and wise enough to listen when others do the same. She continued, the truth may be painful, but it's the only foundation strong enough to build lasting justice upon. She gestured toward the church with its simple but powerful message carved above the entrance. Those words, "The truth will set you free," aren't just decoration or empty philosophy. They're a promise we make to each other and to anyone who comes here seeking a second chance. The ceremony that followed was the most moving yet, with confessions, apologies, and reconciliations that brought tears to many eyes. Former enemies embraced, old wounds were acknowledged and healed, and the community once again renewed its commitment to the principles that had transformed them all. As evening fell and the crowd began to disperse, Mara found herself alone in the church with the wooden box that contained the kerchief and her written account of the events that had changed everything. She had brought it here years ago, intending to display it as a permanent reminder of their journey, but had never quite felt ready to make that final step. Now, surrounded by the evidence of how far they had all come, she finally understood what was needed. The kerchief would remain here not as a monument to past pain, but as a testament to the power of truth to transform lives and communities. Future generations would need to understand both the cost of justice and the possibility of redemption. Cole found her there as the last light faded from the stained glass windows. Ready to go home? He asked the same question he had posed so many times over the years, but this time Mara's answer was different. I am home, she said, looking around the sanctuary that had been built on the ashes of the place where she had nearly died. This is all home now. The church, the town, the ranch, the people. All of it. They walked together through streets that had once been hostile territory, but were now filled with friends and neighbors, past businesses that operated according to the principles they had helped establish toward the ranch house that glowed with warm light and the promise of family. Behind them, the church stood as a monument to the transformative power of truth spoken in love. Ahead, their home waited with its open doors and generous heart ready to welcome whoever might need shelter, healing, or simply the knowledge that they were not alone in the world. The desert wind sang its ancient song across the rangeland, carrying with it the scent of growing things and the promise of rain. In Windy Ridge, they had proven that even in the harshest landscapes, hope could take root and flourish. When nurtured by courage, watered with truth, and protected by a community committed to justice and love. The girl who had been sold for $30 was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned that true freedom came not from the absence of chains, but from the courage to break them and help others do the same. The kerchief had been her weapon, truth, her strategy, and love, her ultimate victory. As they reached their porch, Mara paused to look back at the town they had helped transform. Lights twinkled in windows, where families gathered for evening meals. The sound of laughter drifted from the community center, where young people held their weekly dances, and the church bell tower stood silhouetted against the star-bright sky like a beacon of hope visible for miles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to extend the circle of belonging they had created. There would be more people seeking second chances, more communities looking to their example, more work to be done in the never-ending struggle for justice and human dignity. But tonight, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the community that had learned to choose love over fear, truth over comfortable lies, and hope over despair, Mara Garrett was finally completely and eternally home. The Wild West had tested them all beyond measure, challenging every assumption about justice, family, and community. But in meeting those challenges with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to their values, they had built something remarkable. A place where broken things could be made whole, where outcasts could find belonging, and where the truth really could set people free. In the end, that was their greatest victory. Not the defeat of individual enemies, but the creation of something beautiful and enduring from the raw materials of pain, courage, and hope. They had proven that communities like people could choose to change, could choose to heal, and could choose to become something better than what they had been before. The kerchief remained in its place of honor, no longer just evidence of a crime, but proof of the power of truth to transform everything it touched. And in Windy Ridge, under the vast frontier sky, the promise carved above the church door continued to echo through the generations. The truth will set you free.